Hello, I'm Katie Steckles.
And I'm Peter Rowlett. And Katie, what's today's mathematical object?
Today's mathematical object is a tangerine.
It's another in this line of things that don't appear mathematical but secretly are.
Yes.
Good.
I think I've kind of found a nice piece of maths within a tangerine. So the origin of this is that when I was a kid, my dad always used to do amusing things like peel fruit in a funny way and things like this. And I have a very strong memory of him explaining the theory of plate tectonics using an apple. And he just sort of cut pieces of peel off the surface of the apple and explained that they can move around a little bit, which is really nice. Although that's very much not how plate tectonics works. The apple would need to be a liquid, I guess. But anyway, one of the other things he would do is he'd peel a tangerine just by hand in one go. So you end up with a single piece of peel at the end of it. And there's obviously a bunch of different ways to do this. I think there's a way that I've seen done that you end up with something that looks a bit like an elephant. I can't remember, you kind of take two ears off the sides and the trunk from underneath and something else. But the way that my dad used to do it was in a spiral. And he'd start from the top of the tangerine and kind of spiral around and keep going all the way around until the bottom of the tangerine. And this is lovely, and you end up with one piece of peel. But I always imagined it as being one long strip of peel, and I never really thought about what shape you actually get. And if you do this, it turns out if you peel it from the top, spiral all the way around in the same direction until you get to the bottom, you end up with, it looks kind of like an S shape or like an integral shape. It's kind of a curve that changes direction in the middle. And it's strange because I'd always thought of it as being a straight strip of peel, but it's got a very distinct curve to it.
It's a sort of thin strip, right? It's a sort of how thin, sort of a centimetre thin strip.
Yeah, well, I guess you can vary the thickness of it, and depending on how thick it is, you'll get slightly different results. But in general, they'll all have this same kind of basic shape.
Because I'm imagining, if you look at a globe being put onto a map, you often get this where it's sort of sections that have been cut off together that are all joined up, but it's a bit... And there are map projections that kind of twist that to make it fill a rectangle and not fill a rectangle and things like that. And like you say, you can do all sorts of other odd shapes where you make several cuts, but don't ever quite disconnect them, so it all comes off in one piece. But this is literally just the same motion right from the top. You're making a thin strip going round and round and round all the way down to the bottom.
Yeah. And it turns out, because I only recently kind of investigated properly what this was, I've always done this. Like every time I've been given a tangerine in my entire life, I've always peeled it this way. I've realised I've just given the impression that I've never bought myself a tangerine and I'm just like a child wandering around being handed fruit. But any time I have obtained a tangerine by any means, this is the way I've peeled it. And I always do it just without even thinking about it. And people around me go, oh wow, that's really nice.
Yeah.
Or they're impressed that I've managed to do it without snapping it anywhere.
Well, that's true, because it looks like it's going to break somewhere. But it is a pretty thing, and you don't expect it.
And it's not the shape you would expect to get. So I thought, I wonder if there is a mathematical reason for this, and I started to dig into it. And I found a paper that someone's done where they've properly explained why you get the shape you get. And the paper is called something like Orange Peels and Fresnel Integrals, which is a magnificent title for a paper. And it includes a figure it's a photograph of a peel that they've done of a full-size orange, so it's quite a decent amount of peel, and they've used a knife, and the strip is about 2 millimetres wide, and it's this beautiful, intricate object that they've created. But I guess the theory is that the shape you get, the thinner strip you take, the better approximation of the shape it is. So if you've got a really wide strip, you might just get sort of a curl at one end and a curl at the other end.
Like a proper integral sign.
Yeah, like an integral sign. But then if you have a thinner strip, you'll have more kind of winds at each end. So the theory is, if you start at the top of the tangerine, or the sphere, as I'm probably going to end up referring to it because that's what it is.
Start at the North Pole.
Start at the North Pole of the tangerine. And you start off with a very tight curl because you're basically just going straight back on yourself because you're working on the top surface and it's basically horizontal. I mean, this is going to be a lot of basically here because I'm basically using a manifold, right? I'm modelling this as a manifold. So locally at the top, it's horizontal. And then...
If you scalped the tangerine and just did it to that bit, you would just get a little spiral.
Yeah, you just get a little internal spiral. So then once you get outside that bit, it starts to get bigger loops. And as you start going down the side of the tangerine, the curve gets looser, I guess is the correct term. And it keeps continuing to get less curved. So it's straighter and straighter until you get to the equator of the tangerine. Right. Which the tangerine now has a North Pole and an equator. It's still not the Earth, it's still just a tangerine. Yep. But it's basically a straight line when you get to the equator. And then beyond that point, you continue spiralling in the same direction around the tangerine. You don't stop and change direction at any point. So you're going the same way. But instead of it now curving outwards, it's now curving inwards again. It's sort of tucking underneath. So the curve that you've got, it goes from being curved very much at the top of the tangerine, increasingly less curved, or decreasingly curved, as you get towards the middle, where it's zero curved, because it's a straight line. It then starts to curve the other way, gradually, and then gets more and more curved until you reach the South Pole, where it's a very tight spiral again. And I guess in the limit of this, when you've got an infinitely thin strip of peel, it's an infinite spiral at the end. It kind of never finishes. It just sort of ends up at a point or whatever.
And it's completely symmetric, as a sphere is symmetric.
I think so, yeah. Depending on how symmetrical your tangerine is and how good your peeling
how
skills are.
Your peeling, right?
You get something that is in theory rotationally symmetric, and it's a really lovely shape, and it's called an Euler spiral. Named after Euler, who all the things are named after.
Because Euler peeled a tangerine this way. And
I assume so, yeah. I never know with things whether it's named after Euler because Euler did it or because someone just went, you know who's great?
Right.
Let's just name this after Euler.
Yes.
Anyway, the Euler spiral, I suspect it is because it ties into a lot of nice sort of physicsy things that Euler feels like Euler might have been involved in somehow. But it's a curve whose curvature varies with the distance along the curve, basically. So at the middle of the curvature is 0, and at the ends of the curves it's plus and minus infinity, basically. So if it's positive curvature, it curves one way, and if it's negative, it curves the other way. And it's a known structure. And it's really lovely that just because this fruit happens to be a sphere, and I happen to peel it in a way that's got some kind of logical ordering to it, that I get this wonderful known shape. And it has a couple of sort of applications. So I think it's the kind of curve that you use if you want to design something like a railway line, or if you're a racing driver picking a line on a racetrack, because you don't want to accelerate, like turning-wise accelerate. I don't know how you separate out speed acceleration versus direction acceleration.
I'm sure with it being a vector.
Yeah, but it's a vector, fine. So you don't want to accelerate too quickly. So you want the amount of turning that you're doing to change constantly or change in a linear way. So
because if you're a train or a tram or something, I'm remembering they put a tram in Nottingham. There's a big curve in the market square, and when they first opened it, they had a lot of trouble trying to get trams going around this without falling off the tracks at some point. Yeah. And that's to do with it basically was turning a little bit too sharply, I think.
Yeah, so if you use a section of an Euler spiral, so if you want to go from straight to curved, you need to start with 0 curvature and then gradually increase the amount of curvature as you go round, sort of thing. So they'll use sections of this curve to design railway lines and things like that. And then there's also, I think there's something else, something like the distance between 2 points on an Euler spiral can be used to model the amount of the rate of drop-off of light passing through a slit or something in optics, that if you shine some light through a thing, the rate at which the light drops off once you get past the slit is modelled by the distance between 2 points on an Euler spiral. So it connects into lots of other different areas of maths, but it's just a really nice shape to look at. As you say, it's when you see someone do this, they put it down on the table and you go, oh wow, that's lovely. But it's got all of this kind of nice maths behind it.
So what is happening to the curvature? That's what I'm. So as you go along this thing, the rate changes.
Oh, it's going to be one of these things, isn't it? I think it changes. It changes linearly with the distance along the curve, I guess. So
there's really a family of them, I suppose.
Yes, I suspect so. Yeah,
rates,
depending on the. I mean, I was going to say on the curvature of your sphere, but that's all spheres, isn't it? I mean. Yeah, I'm trying to think how the family would be parameterised. I don't know. I guess it might be the thickness of the strip of peel or something like that.
Yeah.
But you might find the centre line of the strip is a slightly different version of the Euler spiral each time or something. But it's also referred to as a clothoid, I think is another name for it. There's some people I've shown it to have said, oh, it's a clothoid.
Okay.
It was particularly when I was in the Netherlands. Everyone, oh yes, clothoid.
Right.
And I was like, is that just what you call it here? Or is that another name for it? Because there are other things that are also called a clothoid. I've definitely seen Hugh Hunt describe the loop on a roller coaster shape as a clothoid. Okay. So I don't know if they're related or if that's just another thing that uses the same word. But it's... it's the curvature is dependent on the distance along the curve in a linear way.
Okay. And I'm sort of getting Euler, because the exponential function, the rate of change is determined by the current value, and it sort of feels a little bit that sort of, but it's not quite that.
Yeah, maybe that's the connection. I don't know.
Maybe. And then you've got an asymptote at the 2 poles, basically. Yeah.
or a little stem on your tangerine. That's also known as an asymptote. Yeah.
Yes.
And the dot at the bottom, don't know what that's for.
No,
Yeah.
no. But clearly, and also an asymptote, yeah.
Yeah, but the best thing about the Euler spiral is that there is a free one included with every tangerine.
Absolutely.
So whenever you get any kind of peelable fruit, I should say this also applies to satsumas, mandarins, clementines, the whole range.
Yeah. So
actually,
you can play around with this spiral without having to strip the surface of the earth.
exactly, yeah. I did do this once as a live demo, and I asked someone to fetch me some peelable fruit. Just any kind of peelable fruit is fine,
Right.
and they came back with a blood orange.
Oh.
And I ended up doing it by hand, and I had to dig my thumbnail into this thing. It was absolute murder, and at the end of it, it was all juice under my thumbnail, and it was horrible. But I had to do it while talking to an audience. So
Yeah.
I kept it together, but only just. But I did get to eat a delicious blood orange afterwards. So that's the other benefit to this as a demo, is you get a fruit that you can then consume afterwards.
Yeah. Well, so we're both on Twitter. I'm at Peter Rowlett.
And I am at Steckles, and we both blog at aperiodical.com, which is where you can find more episodes of this podcast.
And if you'd like to email us and talk oranges or tangerines or anything else, you can email objects@aperiodical.com.
The music is Funk Game Loop by Kevin MacLeod, licensed under Creative Commons.